Prior to 2018, gambling and sport betting in the US was unreliable and done mostly via offshore accounts. Then, in May of that year, the US Supreme Court struck down the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, a federal law introduced in 1992 that had prohibited states from authorizing sports gambling. Many states moved to legalize sports betting instantly, with online betting shops popping up soon after, removing hurdles many of those consumers in the US were facing. I'm delighted to introduce my guest today, Aaron Fischer, who is the CEO of Fischer Gaming, a boutique consulting firm specializing in the global gaming industry. Aaron, welcome. Your company has launched last year in partnership with ETA, the Fischer Sports Betting and iGaming UCITS ETF. First of all, give us a little bit of info about this ETF with the ticker BETS.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, thanks for having me. So we're very excited to launch the ETF last year. So it specializes in sports betting and iGaming. We have around 35 stocks listed across the world from the US, from Europe, and also one in Australia as well. So the majority of the companies have exposure to digital gaming, which is sports betting and iGaming, with a lot of focus on the US. So the US is really the growth market over the next few years. So yeah, the Europe market's been pretty well developed, and also Australia, but the US market opened up, as you mentioned, with the repeal of PASPA. So that's really the driving catalyst around that market. So generally, if we look across the world, there's normally a lot of pent-up demand for gaming. And when governments decide to change the regulation, that stimulates a huge growth in the revenues. So in the US, there was about $2 billion in revenues in 2020, and Goldman Sachs are expecting that to increase to $53 billion by 2033. Some other analysts from Morgan Stanley, or if you look at some company forecasts from MGM or DraftKings, they're all forecasting huge growth over the next 10 years. So it's really an exciting time for the US market.
Yeah, so as I was saying there in the introduction, a lot of this was brought on by that change in regulation in the US in 2018. And specifically in California, there's issues approving legislation because we've got this clash between the online giants and the tribal casinos and racetracks. Can you give us a bit more on that?
Yeah, so what's happening in the US now, it's all state by state. So the legislation was changed and allowed each state to decide whether they want to legalize sports betting and online casino, or iGaming we call it. So what we've seen is a bunch of states have legalized pretty quickly. So you've got New York and some other states, Michigan, for example, they've all moved to legalize sports betting. And some states have legalized iGaming, and now some other big states are yet to legalize. So it's Florida, Texas, and California. So in some states like California, you've got the big gaming companies like a DraftKings or an MGM who want to legalize sports betting and iGaming. And you've got other companies who maybe have existing bricks and mortar casinos that are very resistant to that because they might lose market share or share of wallet to the digital space. So that's what kind of makes the sector exciting, but also one to follow over a long period of time because it's all state by state. You start with sports betting and then add iGaming over time. Now, the issue has been that sports betting is becoming widespread. So we're getting up to 30 or 40 states over the next few years. And that's great. There's a lot of support around sports betting from the sports teams and the media companies, increases fan engagement. And as you might have mentioned in the beginning, that a lot of people have been betting on sports anyway, illegally or with friends. So a lot of social acceptance around sports betting, and then iGaming or online casino is sort of following a bit slow behind. The issue for some of the operators though is that you normally use sports betting to acquire the customers, and then you monetize a lot of those customers through cross-selling to iGaming, which is where a lot of the profit is, and iGaming's been lagging behind sports betting.
Yeah, now let's talk a bit more now about Europe, because you were saying the US is a big market, a lot of potential there, but the fund is also invested in Europe and targeted at European investors as well. Now, there has been a lot of change in regulation recently, for example, in the UK, about what is considered gambling and what is considered safe for consumers. Do you think this will have an effect on the ETF going forward if we do see these regulations tighten a little bit?
So yeah, for sure. Like the US is deregulating, and then other countries like the UK are tightening up. So that's a natural cycle of gaming. When we look at the ETF we set up, there is again sort of over 30 stocks. Some of them are listed in Europe, but a lot of the companies in our ETF are geared to exposure in the US. So we would argue that 80% of the growth globally is going to come from the US over the next 10 years. Although the UK will slow down with the tougher regulation, but we also believe that that tougher regulation's already been priced into the shares of these companies. So it's all expected, and we expect to hear some news flow around what's happening in the UK in the next few months.
And how about in the US? Because regulation we know recently changed in favor, but could that change the other way around? I mean, you know, a lot of it is focused on the fact that the US is opening up and allowing more access for consumers to this. Do you think there's a risk that you may see this, that may see more pushback to this and see this change sometime in the future?
No, I mean, we haven't seen that. I think sports betting is pretty widely accepted. It's done well here in the UK. It's done well in Australia. So for the most part, we think sports betting will continue to roll out over a period of time, but also there's also regulatory hurdles or legislation hurdles that we need to overcome. But the iGaming part has less sort of natural support, so the iGaming might take longer than expected. But sports betting's, you know, really widely accepted in the US now.
And how about iGaming? What effect has COVID had on it? Have you seen potentially more adoption of it because of the way?
Well, there has been, because some of the, obviously, gaming can generate a lot of tax revenues for state governments. So that's been a catalyst to legalise. So it's an additional source of revenues for state governments. So yeah, COVID's actually been a catalyst for the legislation changes that we've seen.
And just to finish off, do you have any key takeaways you would like to give to investors that are interested in investing in this ETF?
Well, we think it's a really good time to invest in this ETF right now. When we launched at the peak of the market. So a lot of the stocks in the index and the ETF, like DraftKings and MGM, they were at sort of all-time highs, and they've come back a lot over the last 12 months. So we think that the valuation for the industry is compressed significantly. There's not a lot of appetite to invest in stocks and ETFs right now. But we think really, if you take a longer term view on things, this is a really good time to buy the ETF. Also, there has been some concerns that while the revenues have been tracking ahead of expectations, the earnings have been a bit below expectations, because a lot of the companies have been spending heavily on marketing spend and also to acquire the customers and other regulatory costs. So we think the earnings will trough this year, and therefore we'll start to see positive earnings momentum later this year and early next year. So it's normally good to buy ETFs and shares about 6 months ahead of the turn in earnings. So we think it's a really good time to buy for the earnings momentum. And then secondly, we also believe there'll be a lot of M&A activity in the industry. So MGM bought Leo Vegas, or announced the acquisition of Leo Vegas recently. And we think there'll be more consolidation to come over the next 2 years.
Well, thank you, Aaron, so much for joining me today. That was Aaron Fischer, CEO of Fischer Gaming. For more videos from us here at IGTV, join us on Twitter @IGCom, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.